Hello, today on Retro Wiki'd we have a new product review. Samsung Galaxy Tab S5e that I think has some very interesting feature. This is going to be an unboxing and first impression video. I hope you will find it interesting. So let's move on and see what this tablet is all about. I will also tell you along the way what were the main reasons for which I chose the product, but first of all let me show you what you can find in the box. So you have the typical Samsung packaging. I think it looks very nice. It's typical of relatively mid-range to high-end product. Of course, this taking into account the moment in which the video is being made, this model is quite old, but again it has some redeeming features. Alright, so it's a 10-inch tablet, 10.5 inch or something around that. It has I think around 4 gigabytes of memory, so it's not a lot. 64 gigabytes of storage space, and the most important feature in my octa-core, I think, processor, and the most important feature from my perspective is that it has an OLED screen, and I think this is the most important aspect to it, because Samsung decided, unfortunately, in newer products that an OLED screen is not really necessary. Although LCD screens are quite fine, I have to say that ultimately this is not really the best situation, because there are many cases where an LCD screen is simply not at the level of quality you can expect, especially in the case of the contrast ratio. And I still think that since there is so much difference between your typical LCD screen and an OLED screen should be featured on all mid-range and high-end tablets, because they offer a totally different experience. Although I have to admit the fact that OLED screens, especially in older generation, using older generation technology, doesn't have quite the same lighting output, the same brightness, or the same color output capabilities. I'm talking about especially rendering, color rendering in blues. But not only these, there are some colors that cannot quite be represented properly on such an OLED screen. Of course, there have been improvements, but again, I have to say that still an OLED screen has some slight disadvantages in terms of color reproduction compared with an OLED one, although I have to say that the contrast ratio is simply fantastic. It can be considered 1 million to 1, but it's a real contrast ratio. On the other hand, with LCD screens, no matter what you're going to do, at most you're going to have a typical something like, I don't know, 1000 to 5000 real contrast ratio. 1000, 5000, I don't know exactly the value, to 1. So the difference is very high, and especially when you're watching text or anything else that is pertaining very well to a high contrast ratio, graphics, is going to be a wholly different experience. All right, what can I say about this tablet? It's quite thin. I think it's around 5 millimeters thick. It also has 4G LTE capability for using mobile data. I think there are also some accessories that can be used with the tablet, and I think that those indents are made specifically for this purpose. And this connector probably can be used with a keyboard. I don't have such a thing, but ultimately this I assume is the intended purpose. It has a SIM card slot. I think that you can find it somewhere around. No, that's the microphone. Yes, I think on this side. It's the SIM card slot and SD micro card slot. Overall, I think this tablet is quite nice, or at least my first impression of it. The build quality seems very good. Actually, it's quite an expensive tablet if you think a bit. I think it costs somewhere around 400 euros, so 400 something euros. So I think that it's somewhere along the lines of 450 US dollars. It's quite expensive, especially when you take into account the rest of the specifications and all the processor. Not necessarily the best camera, because it also has, but I think it's your typical 8 megapixel camera, or the quality is not going to be spectacular, no matter how you consider it. All right, so I think this is the main capability of the tablet. Ultimately, not a bad model, but unfortunately, the reason why I chose this tablet, of course, let's turn it on. Let me see. I think this is the. Oh. Okay, the on switch is a bit recessed. Yes, it's started. I think that the screen looks in person very good. Perhaps there is a bit of a bloom you may notice on the camera, but this is due to the very high brightness, the very high local brightness of the screen. It's glossy, but this is to be expected. Most tablets are having a glossy screen. All right. What else I can say? It's going to start. It doesn't matter that you are going to see the menu like this, because the configuration is not going to be done in this language. Actually, I don't quite like how most of the translations are being done, and English just suits perfectly my purposes. All right, so let's move. I don't know if we can have the whole setup being done, because oh, sorry, I noticed that it's a bit overly bright. Let me see. Okay, yes, sorry for these small issues. Let me just improve slightly. Yeah, I think around. Yes, not necessarily what I hoped for, but anyway, sorry. Unfortunately, I have to do a little bit of fiddling, because the screen is overly bright, and the moment you're going to move between the screen and the rest of the scene, it has to be a compromise. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, let's just make the necessary choices. Okay, skip, because I don't want to connect to a network. I don't want to copy anything. I just want to show you how the tablet works. All right, use location. No, I don't need right now. Next. No, I don't need. No, we're not going to do any sort of updates. Protect your tablet. No, we're just going to skip it. Skip anyway. All right. No Samsung account. No. All right. The screen looks very nice. It's overly vivid. It looks fantastic in person. It's one of the features that cannot quite be conveyed on your typical LCD screen. Unfortunately, as I said, there is the issue of burning and of course higher power consumption. But ultimately, I think it's very nice. Let's just see if I can take it slightly lower. In general, when I'm using a tablet, I try to customize it in some ways, and the screen brightness is of course the most important issue, because ultimately when you want to enjoy as much as possible a device, you have to make some compromises, and reducing the brightness reduces the amount of stress on the battery and also on the screen. I have to say that up until now, all the devices that had an OLED screen that I used, mostly telephones, did not have major problems even after 3 or 5 years of use, and this was quite an intense use. On the other side, I'm pretty sure that if you leave the brightness unchecked, you can have problems. I remember when I saw in a showroom a phone, I don't remember, probably it was an iPhone some years ago, and the issue was that due to the fact that it stayed so long in a showroom, and it was with the screen turned on most of the time, there were visible marks. I mean that parts of the interface have already been partially visible when you were navigating some screens, like parts of the text or parts of the interface. And this is ultimately what we are let's say having to deal with when we have OLED screens. Unfortunately, it's not something that we can solve, but you have to understand the fact that some years down the line, if you don't care enough for your device, it's obvious that you're going to have some burning. The extent of which depends a lot on how bright the screen was and the temperature, because temperature is always going to magnify the issues. Okay, Android 10, which actually is quite a good version. Let me see some other specifications, though I'm not entirely sure if they are going to be presented over here. No, it's your typical situation. This tablet of course doesn't have Wi-Fi 6. You have to understand the fact that it's Wi-Fi 5 at most, and that's just about it. In fact, most of the tablets I have seen, except high-end models, do not have Wi-Fi 6 capability. 4 GB of memory, as I mentioned. With Android 10, I think this is borderline acceptable. Because since when you start the tablet, already half of the memory is going to be exhausted. I'm pretty sure that when you're going to run updates, even less memory is going to be available, and as you're loaded with applications, I'm pretty sure you're going to have less than a third of the memory available, and especially when they are running browsers, for instance, are quite memory intensive. Of course, it's mostly a low-end configuration by now. The tablet has been released in 2019, if I remember correctly, and right now it's already 3 years old. So, and especially when you have to take into account another fact that tablets rarely are designed as mid-range or top-of-the-line products, and applications are quite lacking in many respects. They're still being seen as basically content consumption devices, and this means that the specifications are already reduced compared with what you may typically expect on a laptop. So there are many issues that are going to be and many compromises that you have to see. All right, first of all, I think that the most important thing you could do when you have an OLED screen is probably to leave it less vivid. This may seem counterintuitive. I mean, why would you let your screen to be less vivid than what your manufacturer has decided? First of all, it's important because typical OLED screens are made to focus on saturation, not necessarily the screen, but the software configuration, because they have this punchy ability. They can have very strong colors with strong contrast, and showing them like this is going to make sure that you have the best impact on the public. Unfortunately, I think this is a very bad choice, because ultimately you're not going to see things as they really are. And most of the graphics you're going to notice is going to be overly saturated. So if you're going to attempt at least some content creation on this tablet, or you're going to check some content you created, for instance, I don't know, a website, your videos or anything else, it's not good to choose an overly saturated profile. You could choose probably AMOLED Cinema or AMOLED Photo, but clearly not the adaptive display, the default setting that, as you can see over here, it just overly emphasizes colors. Probably the closest to normal would be the Cinema. The basic one seems a bit reduced. But why I'm choosing in general the basic option, even if it looks like that? You have to think about that most devices today are still LCD screens. LCD screens have a large problem when they have to focus on contrast or color accuracy. Because while they can render colors clearly better, the way in which they created the image has some sort of relatively how should I present it? It's just like it's not entirely clear. So all the areas are not entirely defined, which means that when you're going to look at a specific image, you're going to be surprised that either colors are overly vivid, or they don't seem to be as right as you may expect. I mean, you take a picture, you look at it, of course, your camera is going to emphasize something, especially if it's on a mobile phone. But ultimately, when you see it on the screen, it's already slightly distorted, especially if it has an LCD screen. But ultimately, when you're going to see it on a laptop screen, on a typical desktop screen, the colors are going to be even more annoying, because most software actually puts so much emphasis on contrast that it's really going to make colors seem very much let's say enhanced, but ultimately they're not going to be correct. So in general, I prefer to have a profile that is a bit less vivid, even if this means that you have reduced let's say rendition of colors. But ultimately, let's make a choice over here and see if we can find a better profile, because I think this one is a bit too low in terms of color accuracy. So let's see this one. I have to think about how much the gamma is going to be off. Over here it's obvious, over here I think this one is the best compromise. And if you look at the screen and all of the elements, I still think that they look quite fine. The older devices did not have this AMOLED camera or AMOLED photo mode, and this meant that you had to accept the fact that colors would be either very dim as it was on the basic profile, or very powerful as it was on the adaptive mode. All right, let me show you what the camera can do. All right, let me see. I think it does a decent job. Of course, you can see the noise readily in the picture. This is actually typical. It's not an overly bright outside scene, but I think it does a decent job. You don't have to expect too much. I think that yes, over here in the macro mode, you clearly see the noise that comes from the camera, but this is actually typical. You cannot expect too much from this tablet, and in general, cameras have problems with overly dim scenes. Let me see if I can. Okay, I think this is the typical focus. Yes, the typical magnification you're going to see. I said the focus when I mentioned magnification because ultimately I wanted to see how good focusing can be. Well, obviously is not going to be spectacular, but again I think it does a decent job. All right, let me see what else I can show. Without using the internet for the moment, you have your typical Samsung applications. I have to say that it's annoying that you cannot take out some of the Samsung applications because ultimately some of them are good, some of them are not so good. And some of them are even pointless when you have your own choices and they just take up space. Of course, I know that Samsung has some deals it has to abide to, and this means that ultimately there are some compromises to be made in the case of let's say features they have to bundle. Ultimately, the most important one is of course, Google Application Suite, because you have your typical support that is going to be entirely enough for all your devices. For instance, the browser. The browser to me it seems always an off choice, but just about any manufacturer puts an emphasis on a specific browser. I don't think that focusing too much on Google Chrome is the best approach, because ultimately Google Chrome is a software that is going to have its own quirks. Although it's the best and most used one, I still think that it's good to have choices. And Firefox, Chrome, perhaps even Edge are very good choices ultimately. So I don't think that bundling the Samsung browser is going to be very good, especially when you feel that it's not as advanced as it could be. In some ways, I think it's based on Chromium, which is actually what Microsoft Edge does. But it's much more, let's say, bare bones than what you might expect. So if you use some specific plugins, I don't think there are many that are available, even after so many years of developing. So I still think that this is a worse choice than, I don't know, using Opera, using Brave browser, or Firefox, or anything else that has been specifically developed for Android. The camera application I think is fine. No, nothing to be against of. The email application is a bit more difficult. It has some features that are good, some features are not good, but and of course there are a plethora of applications that are already available for these kind of purposes, but bundling it to me is not such a bad choice. The Galaxy Store is obviously the application, let's say, collection, the internet collection similar to the Google Play Store, where you can download any sort of application and update them. Some Samsung applications can also be updated using the Play Store, but the others presumably can only be using the Galaxy Store. Of course, the tablet still has the capability of dialing numbers and you're being used just like a telephone, because it also has a mobile application, a mobile connection capability. Okay, the typical Samsung Galaxy suite. Smart things, yes, if you have some Samsung devices, it's going to be fine. I wanted to show to you something else, so sorry for getting back over here. I think that putting a timeout of around 5 minutes is going to be enough, especially if you're a power user. Otherwise, 30 seconds is just overly annoying. When you really need to dim, you can dim the screen. I think this is more than a good choice. Okay, I mentioned smart things. Yes, Samsung members, Flow. These are the type of applications that I don't necessarily want to have on the device. Some of them can be uninstalled, and that is very fine. Even the browser can be uninstalled. That's very nice. I remember there are some Samsung devices where you cannot uninstall it. The file browser is alright, although I have to say it's nothing particularly interesting. Alright, the email application. Oh, even the email application can be uninstalled. That's a surprise for me, a very welcome situation. Bixby, I think this one cannot be. Yes, it's true. Bixby is the, let's say, Google Assistant that Samsung has been quite promoting for quite a while. I don't think it was overly successful, but this is mainly due to the fact that Samsung is not in the position it was I think 10 years ago, when so many devices were made by Samsung and Samsung had a very strong presence. Still, it's their attempt. I have to appreciate the fact that they want to do something as good as Google, and they offer an alternative. Unfortunately, the fact that it's still being bundled is not going to be something I would appreciate a lot, not only for security reasons, but for other reasons as well. Bundling Microsoft apps, yes, in some ways it's good, in others it's bad. I think that the best showcase for most tablets would be for open source software. And I still think that this one has the most promise, because you already make most people, especially ones that are not very well accustomed to, they make them aware of software that is readily available, free, very nicely developed, and very powerful. Office suites, yes, this is a difficult let's say situation. There are not very many software that is being available for Android. I mean, yes, you have LibreOffice, but LibreOffice is mostly a viewer at this point. Probably it will become much more than that. You can use all sorts of emulations, but they are going to be very slow, so I don't recommend it. And I think there was another Office suite made by a Chinese company. I don't remember exactly. It was quite good, but it has its own quirks, and of course, since it's a software made by Chinese developers, there are potential issues related to security and other aspects. So I don't really recommend it. And other than that, yes, your typical Google software. Spotify, it's a quite popular application. Some users might appreciate it, others not. Netflix, YouTube, which I'm pretty sure is an application that is already bundled, yes, as you can see. Your typical calendar application, you can probably synchronize your calendar with your other devices. You can probably synchronize your devices with your Google account. Sorry, I just thought that we should be having a slightly better, yes, right now it's focused, to have a slightly better perspective. Sorry for all these small issues. When you're trying to tap something on the camera in order to have a better perspective, there is always the chance of pressing and taking it as an intention to modify some settings, so sorry for that. All right, what else can I show? The typical settings menu. In general, I have to say that my only major complaint with the UI that Samsung uses is the fact that it still does not have the capability of copying something from one application to another, and this has been implemented, I think, since Android 9, and Samsung still has not implemented in any device that uses the modern One UI, let's say, management interface. And I still think that this is a letdown. That you have most of the things that could be on the task switcher, but still some of them are missing. Notes, yes, is a popular application. Some people use it quite heavily. Unfortunately, what I have noticed is that it's still quite difficult to import and export some data unless you are going to use the typical content transfer application. I think it's not Samsung Backup. I don't remember exactly how it's named. It had some name changes in the past. I don't know if it's obvious over here. No, it's not. Ultimately, I don't have a lot to show at this point. Probably I have to use the to access the internet, and then probably I can show you some things. But ultimately, I think that in this state it offers you a very good understanding of the capabilities. I have to say that yes, the interface seems fluent enough. I'm pretty sure this is not going to be the case when you run so many applications and they're going to have something that runs at the same time. Overall, yes, it's a good tablet. Again, you have to run benchmarks, you have to run your favorite applications to really get to know that, but I'm not expecting this level of performance. When I wanted this tablet, I focused on the ability of browsing the internet. I mean, seeing some websites, using probably YouTube, not playing games. This was not the intended purpose. Reading, and for these tasks, I think it handles quite perfectly with no issues. What was the most important, of course, was the pre-requirement for the OLED screen. And I mentioned this OLED screen for quite a while, but you have to understand one important issue. As mentioned, you got to have the best screen on such a device, and I still think that OLED screens are unmatched in terms of contrast and color capability, even if LCDs also have a very good color capability, perhaps even better in some ways than the OLED screen. Unfortunately, the contrast and the feel of having such a beautiful contrast, every pixel is entirely defined, there is no bleeding, nothing. It's actually spectacular, and it is an experience that I still think is premium in and of itself. On the other side, the problem I mentioned, I think that other than the S6 tablet that seems to be very hard to get, at least in parts of Europe or in my country, it's clearly so. Other than the S6 tablet, all tablets that have been released later are not featuring an OLED screen. So S7 tablets, and I think even S8, I don't remember quite correctly, do not have an OLED screen. They have a typical TFT LCD screen. It's not bad, but again, I think it's a very bad let's say capability from my point of view. All right, so without saying much more, I think that I will probably end the video over here. I have to use the tablet more in order to have a better saying on the performance and on software capability, so I'm not going to focus on this. If it's going to be useful, I will probably make another video, but for the moment I think that it's enough. You have a good feel of what the tablet offers. About the bundle, yes, it's your typical Samsung bundle. There is the charger, that I think has a fast charging capability, but nothing spectacular. It's your typical 15 watt adapter. Alright. You probably have over here the cable, the extension cable, and in this package probably it's the manual, and I think this just about sums up what you can find over here. Ultimately, I still think it's a good tablet. Probably time will tell if it was really a good choice. Other than that, of course, I wanted mostly to show to you why I chose this tablet, and I think that I made a good choice. Ultimately, I wanted to find a better tablet, but unfortunately, ones that have OLED screens are already very expensive, even if the screen itself is not the main cause, and the software configuration still leaves a lot to be desired. So ultimately, it's just a preview mostly of what the tablet is capable of, and I hope you find it interesting. So if you enjoyed the video, I'm very glad. Please comment, subscribe to the channel, and of course look upon more things that could be interesting over this YouTube collection I already created. New devices, old devices, various interesting ideas or concepts that I think are worth discussing. So that's just about it. I hope you have a great day, and thank you very much for watching.